I want to talk about this work that I've been doing as a part of my PhD dissertation. But the more faithful story of this is that it's a part of my crisis. It's my crisis as a cryptographer who came up with a tool and suddenly have to ask the question of, am I really solving a real problem, or I'm just playing God and making up my own threat model and get a cool story that get published. So this is my effort to go into the field of science and technology studies and try to figure out what are the consequences of my technology and how can we turn it around on its head. So this work is a part of Yale School of Medicine and also Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard. So I want to start by talking about what is genomic research. So the human genome is a complete set of DNA instruction in human, which means that a study of the human genome requires understanding the property, the structure, the function of the human genome, and also its association with disease and traits. So because human genome is large, comprising millions of DNAs, millions of genes, and also there is the genetic diversity across human population, genomic research requires a lot of data, which means that it demands a lot of data sharing between institutions. But this raised a privacy concern because the human genomes are unique and they are permanent. This raised a concern of what would happen if that data leaks in the process of sharing. So this leads to privacy agreements which lock down the movement of data across the institutional border and sometimes national border, which leads to big challenges in research. So there are emerging secure computation tools that are trying to solve this problem of computing on encrypted data or shares of data, right? So there are tools that are from cryptography like secure multiparty computation. There is fully homomorphic encryption, but also solutions that are based on secure hardware like the trusted execution environment. So this is the work that we published in Cell System 2 years ago on privacy-preserving genotype imputation using Intel SGX, which is a trusted execution environment technology. So genotype imputation is a statistical method for inferring missing genotypes from the reference panel from the human population to fill in the missing gaps in the genotype coverage. And the benefit of this method is to increase the coverage of genotypes in the downstream analysis. So in our application, we are working in a client-server model where the client uploads the data into the server for it to be imputed and receive the output. So we introduced a tool called SMAC, which is a secure genotype imputation tool where in the first step, the user upload the genotypes with missingness into the central server. And the imputation server is running an algorithm called SMAC, which we developed in Intel SGX, using a reference panel that otherwise would not be accessible by the user who might be independent and small researchers. So the benefit of Intel SGX in SMAC is that it provides runtime isolation and memory encryption against even malicious OS. And SMAC offers the novel side-channel resilient techniques while retaining efficiency and accuracy with the state-of-the-art tools out there. So we have come up with these tools, and now we are trying to figure out whether this tool can be used in practice or not. But in practice, there are a lot of issues. There are a lot of genomic tools out there in the privacy realm, but they are not being used, although there are some efforts to make that happen. There are some assumptions about existing barriers, whether it would be computational efficiency or poor usability and others, and the focus are often based on these two barriers. But we want to take a step back and ask a different question of whether these tools are even right for the context to begin with. Are we developing the right threat model for the problem in genomics to begin with? So this part onward is the work in progress, and we welcome comments and even collaboration. So to answer this question of whether it is the right tool or not, we look at the key idea, which is called the Contextual Integrity Framework by Helen Nissenbaum. First, contextual integrity stipulates that the context matter and that privacy norms and expectation are context independent. And also, the focus is on very much the information flow between sender and receiver and transmission principle, and how that information flow aligns with the established norms within a given context. This is also a normative framework, meaning that it is used to make a judgment whether an action is privacy invasive or not. It is if it disrupts the established norms. So to move forward, we have to understand what exactly is the context here in genomic research context. It is somewhere between a scientific research and healthcare, right? And in each context, there are their own specific purposes that may not align in some cases. And they also have their own sets of norms, and there are also shared norms that are governing these contexts. But because of the different purposes in these different contexts, it creates tension between institution and research subjects, between trying to get results and trying to create actionable healthcare, but also the tension between transparency on the one hand and privacy on the other. Now, this tension has to be carefully balanced in the research context. But the question we need to ask is what happens when we try to apply secure computation with its own threat model in this context? And how does it disrupt these norms? Right? So we start by arguing that secure computation threat model actually disrupts the genomic context. We start with the traditional information flow in the context of genomic research and all the attack services. We can see clearly in this information flow, right, that information goes from research subject to the institution, to the database, and to the computing server where the analysis happens. And the adversary can target any surface of attack that happens here. Now, we compare this with the secure computation threat model, where in secure computation, there is an assumption about the presence of the honest parties and also the corrupt party working together to try to compute some function. And these parties are not willing to share the sensitive input because the corrupt party might steal or might take the data, while still trying to achieve the same goal, same computation goal. So now what happens when you combine these two together? You get a very limited view of information flow that is disrupted. First of all, it's no longer clear who's sending information to whom and what is the relationship between the party that is the receiver and the adversary. Is there information flow going on here? What is the information being sent to begin with if what we want out of it is the research outcome and not exactly the sensitive genomic input? But further than that is that the contextual norms are also altered by the assumption about the threat model. First of all, secure computation raised a question about trust, where the requirement to enter into this model is to be skepticism of other institutions, whether they have scientific integrity or not, to not steal data, or from a different perspective, can we trust these institutions to protect our data to begin with? But either way, these are good questions, but they require that you ask this question first, as opposed to trust and collaboration that is the foundation of scientific research. The focus also shifts from patient's privacy to institutional data security because the focus is very much on the computing server and not the patients. So this new workflow leads to the invisibility of the research subject in the consideration of the entire system, but also finally that the pursuit of security becomes individual because the narrative becomes about honest parties against corrupted parties instead of thinking of security as the entirety of the system. So what do we do about this? What we want out of this is a secure computation framework that facilitates adoption by respecting the contextual norms and purposes and enabling risk analysis on the entire system. That is, by aligning the tools with the stakeholders and practitioners' understanding of institutional trust and risk management practices and prioritizing research subjects' privacy. So we start our new model by turning secure computation on its head, by going from distrust to trust. Now, why is trust important? It's not just important, but it is a more faithful story about how scientific collaboration works. And it's also serving a sociological function of bringing together these parties and institutions to begin with. So we want a secure computation that is based on trust. So how do we do this? Right? We first start by, instead of assuming that institutions distrust each other. We assume that they can trust each other and try to work together to protect the system. So removing the adversary out of the party and make them external to the system, which is the second move. Now, cryptographers in the room might be anxious because isn't this just the trusted third-party model? Without trust, why do you need cryptography? You can just trust, right? So what I'm trying to find out is what is left of cryptography when we can trust. What does it add to the system? But also, this move alone make explicit the information flow because we can clearly identify who is the sender and who is the receiver, what is the information type, and what is the transmission principle. And we view the adversary as being outside the system, trying to compromise this contextual integrity. So this is a change in perspective, but it has some profound consequence here, right? That allows us to go from talking about secure computation as a security property that is reserved under certain assumptions that may or may not hold, to talking about leakage control in an event of the security breach. I have to move quickly here. It also allows us to make argument about secure hardware, where when the hardware is protected by a willing institution, it creates a stronger threat model to use hardware, trusted hardware model, like trusted execution environment. So in the second move, we are putting back the trust-based framework into the information flow, which render visible information flow and attack surfaces in a unified system, which makes explicit the property of secure computation as a risk management tool, which allows us to see the big picture of where the information go from research subject to the institution and then to the computing server, and which makes it visible exactly where secure computation is protecting and what is the perimeter. It also highlights the research subject as a data sender distinguished from the institution, which then enable us to understand the consequence of secure computation on research subjects' privacy, where secure computation in this case might or might not protect the research subject based on the relationship between the research subject and the institution. So finally, I want to wrap it up with our ongoing work in where we try to reframe our existing tool and work with practitioners to deploy our tool using SGX. We're also trying to use this framework and apply new design to it to see what kind of algorithm we can come up with when the foundation of the algorithm is based on trust. I want to quickly acknowledge the contributor to this project, and I will want to open the floor to the questions. Thank you.